Ah, President Lincoln's eulogy, delivered by the Essex County Medical Society.
That we mingle our sorrows with those of our fellow citizens at the loss to the nation of a man of pure and honest heart, a patriot of the loftiest purpose, a ruler wise, benignant, and beloved, with malice towards none and charity towards all. His administration of the government during the term of his services commends him to the nation and to the world as possessed of the highest order of statesmanship. Amid our sorrows for his untimely loss, in this crisis of our national affairs, we rejoice that we may hand down to the future the name of Lincoln as one of the illustrious names which are born not to die.
A Society for the Advancement of the Profession and Promotion of the Public Good. That advertisement in the New York Mercury in June 1766 is what I called for, a society for the state of New Jersey and its physicians. It was time for doctors of professional standing to band together. The war was over in 1763. There were about 88 physicians in New Jersey, most in eastern New Jersey. There was restlessness in the colonies, and almost no hard cash. Barter had been common from the time of the earliest settlement. A doctor's fee might be a quarter of veal, a bushel of wheat, a few pounds of flax, or a watermelon. Most troublesome to the conscientious practitioner was the wandering quacks who set themselves up as doctors of medicine, charged whatever the traffic could bear, and remained only long enough to be found out by patients, often too late to be a legitimate physician. 17 who agreed so answered and presented themselves at the organizational meeting on July 23, 1766. As we arrived, we introduced ourselves and compared distances traveled and hours spent. For these reasons, the signatories united in a common purpose for our mutual improvement, the advancement of the profession, and the promotion of the public good.
In June 1777, newspapers of the country were asked to publish an announcement declaring, "The new medical arrangement joined with a humane desire to prevent the repetition of distresses which afflicted the brave soldiers, to watch over their health and preserve lives." Most hospitals that were developed were makeshift affairs, converting old barns for the infirmed. Dr. James Tilton, while serving in Princeton, noted that many a fine fellow have I brought in for slight infections and carried out dead of hospital fever. Finally, in Morristown, Dr. Tilton had cabins built of rough logs, somewhat in the style of Indian huts.
Jockey Hollow, a sign of progress to the revolutionary fighter. It was here that the care and welfare of the fighting soldier was brought to a higher level. There was a fire built in the middle of the ward. Patients lay with their feet to the fire and their heads against the wall. The wards were completely ventilated, the smoke contributing to combat infections without giving the least offense to the patients. The bedding in these houses consisted of a bunk or a cradle, a sack or a bed tick of coarse linen filled with straw, and a couple of blankets. However, smallpox, which was common among the soldiers, needed to be addressed. We set up inoculating stations where civilians as well as soldiers were to apply. My dear friend General Washington, who incidentally took great joy in nicknaming me Dear Dr. Bones after a song I had sung during off-duty hours, wrote to Congress. The smallpox has made such head in so many quarters, I find it impossible to keep it from spreading through the whole army in the natural way. I have therefore determined to inoculate not only the troops now here, but shall order to inoculate the recruits as fast as they arrive in Philadelphia.
The Medical Society of New Jersey was actually started in 1766, before the Revolutionary War, and is now the oldest continuously operating medical society in any state in the United States. Now, that goes back a long ways, 1766, but actually the practice of medicine in Essex County began 100 years before that, when the English first arrived on the shores of the Passaic River and founded the town, then a village, which is now known as Newark. And perhaps even 2 years before that, when Englishmen came from Long Island and settled on the west bank of the Arthur Kill to found the town that is now known as Elizabeth. It's my pleasure to be able to say a bit this evening about the history of the Essex County Medical Society, which, as you know, was founded in 1816, one of 5 county medical societies that were established through an act of the New Jersey legislature that rechartered the Medical Society of New Jersey on its 50th year of existence.
Our society was inaugurated just after our late war with England, which completed the establishment of our national independence. We had scarcely recovered from the revolutionary struggle, that long and dismal period of alternating hopes and fears and despondency. We who had been through the trial by fire for the perpetuation of these principles could appreciate that crisis. That had been no time for scientific progress, nor was the preceding period of colonial dependence conducive to free inquiry and scientific prosperity. Thus, the society was formed at a most opportune moment in history. On June 4th, 1816, John D. Williams, Joseph Quimby, and I, Samuel Manning, along with other physicians and surgeons, met at the home of Moses Roth, innkeeper in the town of Newark, and formed ourselves into a society under the name the District Medical Society for the County of Essex in the state of New Jersey. John D. Williams was elected president, and Joseph Quimby, secretary.
We, the doctors of Essex County,
We, the doctors of Essex County,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
to preserve the standard of excellence in medicine,
to preserve the standard of excellence in medicine,
to stand by our colleagues
to stand by our colleagues
in carrying out the duties of our Hippocratic Oath,
in carrying out the duties of our Hippocratic Oath,
and to be at the people's side
and to be at the people's side
in the fight against disease and human injustice.
in the fight against disease and human injustice.
The Civil War is often looked at with sentiment and romance, such as seen in the drama Gone with the Wind. Yet the reality was one of extreme carnage and disease, which can only be described as complete opposition of the doctor's goal.
I am Dr. Doherty. I give the experience more in detail because it admirably illustrates the value of the medical staff to our Army and the duties performed by the members of the Medical Society. I entered military service in 1861, shortly after the Battle of Bull Run. During the campaign, as it will appear from the extracts from the books in the medical department, I was largely instrumental in saving the Army of the Potomac from the dreadful effects of scurvy.
The outbreak of the Civil War in April 1861 confronted physicians and laymen alike on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line, with the realization that scarcely anyone had first-hand knowledge of war or the medical burdens that would follow. 5 days after the firing on Fort Sumter, President Lincoln asked for 3,000 men from New Jersey, and 10,000 volunteered within a week. Physicians, of course, were among them.
I am Dr. Garrabrant. I practiced medicine in Newark, New Jersey, and entered the United States service in June 1861 as surgeon of the 2nd Regiment, 2nd Brigade, under command of General Kearny, and served with the regiment at the First Battle of Bull Run. I also served in Gaines Mills, Savage Station, White Oak Swamp, the Second Battle of Bull Run, and attended the wounded at Williamsburg and South Mountain. I was sent in May of 1863 by order of General Burnside to Vicksburg to be in charge of the steamer Atlantic. This steamer was fitted up with all the appoints of a large hospital: surgeons, stewards, nurses, medical and surgical supplies. This was the most critical period of the campaign. General Grant was investing Vicksburg. Pemberton had come out of the city to attack him and the enemy, and with desperation was throwing every available horse upon the rear and flank of our army. The hot southern climate, malaria, and inadequate supplies made it difficult for the alleviation of the sufferings of the wounded. The medical officers suffered extremely from fatigue and the same depressing influences of exposure and climate. Those fights will probably never be recorded, for they are in the shadows. But the toilsome march, the exhausting care of the sick and wounded, and the almost tropical sun were endured by them cheerfully in the consciousness of deserving well of their country and profession.
As we look back on the Civil War, medical treatment and challenges were an everyday obstacle doctors faced.
There was no general military hospital in the country at the outset of the war, where recuperating wounded and sick soldiers could convalesce, or not, after initial triage and treatment at camp and field hospitals. But by the second year of the war, close to 200 general military hospitals were in operation. One such hospital was the Ward United States Army Hospital in Newark. Marcus Lafayette Ward, a Newark businessman, politician, and public benefactor, rushed off to Princeton to seek authorization from the governor to open a military hospital in Newark under state auspices. Ward accepted the offer of a large 4-story brick warehouse located between the New Jersey Railroad and the Passaic River at the foot of Center Street. Ward traveled to Washington, where on June 17, 1862, he secured from the Secretary of War the acceptance of the institution as a U.S. General Hospital. Ward's early efforts were recognized by the official designation of the hospital as the Ward United States Army General Hospital. In 1865, the federal government leased some 26 acres of an old estate on the north side of Newark. In the 3 years of its existence, the Ward Hospital treated over 8,000 military patients with 200 deaths. With the war over, the physicians of Newark could turn their attention to a problem that had vexed the city since the early 1850s. In the pages of the bulletin, the Ward Hospital historian expressed his hope that the military hospital would be at long last followed by a like institution for the poor and indigent of the city of Newark, a growing metropolis of over 70,000 people with no hospital. Although 2 church-sponsored hospitals, St. Barnabas and St. Michael's, opened in Newark in the 1860s, and the German hospital in the 1870s, now Clara Moss, it was not until 1882 that a 75-bed municipal hospital was opened in a new wing, attached to but administered separately from the city almshouse.
I am Dr. Calhoun. I entered the service in June of 1861 as assistant surgeon in the 74th New York, the 5th Regiment of Sickles Brigade. In July of 1861, the first deaths from cholera occurred. This attack was caused supposedly by a cook having boiled some beans in salt water. By July of 1866, 68 deaths had been reported. I wrote a letter to my mother in which I expressed no fears for myself, but the hope that I might die with my harness on. As General Sickles came into the room, I said, "General, I hope I have done my duty. It is great consolation to me to die at my post."
During the Civil War, the bounty system was a way for enlistees to pay for someone to replace them. After the war, money was left over and used to create the Camden City Dispensary, which was established by the Camden City Medical Society.
Entrepreneurial individuals organized what they called bounty associations. And in Camden, there was a very successful bounty association called the North Ward Bounty Association. And what they did was to find men who would be willing to fight in the Army in the stead of another individual who would offer up the money that would pay this guy to go fight the Confederates. And it was expensive, $400 or $500 to get somebody to do that. Well, the North Ward Bounty Association, like all the other bounty associations, had this money and sort of invested funds and so on. And when the war was over, the people who had given money and hadn't found somebody to serve in their stead wanted the money back. And the North Ward Bounty Association refused to give the money back, and the people who were involved sued the North Ward Bounty Association in court demanding a return of their funds. Well, the judge decided that they couldn't have the money back. The people who had paid it in, they were out that amount of money. And the North Ward Bounty Association had to be dissolved, and the funds had to be used for some beneficial purpose to the citizens of Camden County. And he asked for companies, individuals, single persons, or societies to step forward and offer their services. Well, the Camden County Medical Society did that. They said that they would establish a clinic for poor people at 6th and Federal Street in Camden. And they did. They built a large building there. I have a picture of it in the book here. And it was called the Dispensary of the Camden County Medical Society. So it was a good thing that the doctors of the county did. And this was also at a time when there was no hospital, because the Cooper Hospital hadn't been built. Cooper Hospital didn't open until 25 or 30 years after the Civil War was over. So that facility, the dispensary of the Camden City and Camden County Medical Society, was the only place where poor people could go.
Though America was devastated after the war, many of the northern states remained intact. The South, however, could not say the same. The war had taken a terrible toll, destroying crops, crippling the economy, and leaving the citizens destitute. Since no Civil War battles were fought on New Jersey soil, the state was able to focus on industry and economic prosperity. It was during this time that prominent New Jersey natives, such as Thomas Edison, began to revolutionize the world with his inventions, most notably the incandescent bulb, which led to the boom of the textile industry in Paterson.
The era of the Civil War was sort of the beginning in America of the Industrial Revolution. It's right here in our neighboring county of Passaic County, Paterson, the silk mills that were powered by the Passaic River, and the dye industry that was associated with that, and also the iron industry, iron and steel. Of course, Paterson was a major hub of that. There wasn't so much of that in Essex County. What Essex County had was brass making because of the copper mines in Belleville, and these mills extended. There was an enormous one in Glen Ridge right now, where the ball field is on Bloomfield Avenue, was a bronze mill at one time, and all the diseases that spin off of working with metal, lead poisoning and mercury poisoning, particularly men in this area, particularly Bakerland in Bloomfield and Thomas Edison, discovered that you could make extremely hard new products out of phenol and formaldehyde compressed under high pressure and high temperature. And they produced the phonograph records of Edison, and they produced the bakelite that was used as a wood substitute. The side effects of it in the workers and in the neighborhoods downstream, the pollution with phenol and formaldehyde was impressive. At that time, polychlorinated biphenyls that were produced by General Electric Company, originally Thomas Edison's company in Schenectady, New York, they line the whole Hudson River to this day. We had in the town of Orange, that was the hat capital of America, maybe the hat capital of the world, mercury poisoning from making hats, the Mad Hatter. Doctors knew what the cause of it was, but how to control it was a real problem.
Being new to this country, I am just thankful for a job. I have 5 small children and a wife to feed. There are many who go to bed at night hungry, so for this I am thankful. The others have begun talking about the terrible effects on the solution being used. Some have become so ill that they never return. They begin to shake, and some even fall to the ground. I cannot think about that. Some have said that madness is the final result. I do not know if that is true. I pray that it is not. But for now, I must go back to my work.
Also, after the Civil War, there were a number of terrible epidemics in southern New Jersey. Smallpox, diphtheria, cholera. They had a lot of epidemics of cholera. And physicians, particularly there's a physician named Donges, D-O-N-G-E-S, who opened a smallpox hospital in South Camden. And he treated, free of charge, a number of patients with smallpox during a terrible epidemic about, I guess, in the 70s, 1870, 1880, along in there. And saved many lives as a result. He was a practitioner of vaccination, which not everybody agreed upon at that time. And he vaccinated hundreds, if not thousands of people, and essentially single-handed stopped the smallpox epidemic in its track. My grandfather and my father were both physicians, and my great uncle, who was killed in the Civil War while serving as a regimental surgeon for the Union Army, he was killed in 1864, was a physician. And my grandfather, for example, took courses in medical school in medical botany, and he raised his own herbs. And he, digitalis, for example, is a drug used to treat congestive heart failure. Well, he raised his own digitalis purpura, and dried it, ground it up, and made digitalis pills for his patients, or a tincture of, and so they could drink it, and other drugs that he either grew or bought as a botanical entity. Senecot, for example. Senna is a laxative, and castor beans and all that sort of thing. On the other hand, my grandfather was interested in preserving his patient's vision, and he developed, quite unexpectedly, a skill in removing cataracts. And in those days, you had to wait until the cataract became, they used the word ripe. It couldn't be too hard or too soft, and it had to mature, and you had to be able to discern when that magic moment came that you would take the cataract out. So what he would do would be to watch the patient closely for a couple of months, and as the time approached that he would remove the cataract, he would go to a slaughterhouse and get some cow eyes and practice removing the cataract so he'd get slick with it. He could do it very quickly. And
he would have somebody in the family hold the patient's head. The patient would lie down on a table. The other person would hold the patient's head, and he'd drop in a cocaine solution into the eyes, and so the eye would be numb. And then he had a special little knife that he'd cut all the way around the cornea and lift up the cornea, doing this all at super flank speed, and cut out the lens, put the cornea back down, a couple of sutures, and a compression pad. And the patient had to lay like that for a week. He couldn't move around, he couldn't jump up and down, and had to stay in that recumbent position, because if you sat up or looked down the other way, the cornea would detach and you'd lose the eye.
At the end of the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century appeared a group of practitioners known as homeopaths, created by the German physician Samuel Hahnemann. Homeopathy, which arose in Europe, believed that like cures like, in other words, prescribing the indicated drug in minute amounts. Simultaneously, in America, a group of practitioners acted outside of the regular thought of medicine, known as eclectic or Thomsonian practitioners, named for Samuel Thomson, a New Hampshire botanist. Members of his friendly botanical society followed body cleansing treatments utilizing emetics, enemas, and herbs. So offended by these groups, the Medical Society of New Jersey stiffened its resolve that any regular practitioner of medicine, even consulting with an alternative medicine society, was cause for investigation and possible expulsion. So adamant were their feelings in this matter, the society took action against even one of its best-known members, Dr. William A. Newell of Allentown. Despite his eminence, Dr. Newell had served 2 years as governor of New Jersey in 1847 and was elected to Congress. He befriended Abraham Lincoln and became Lincoln's family physician. His colleagues did not hesitate to investigate and charge him with consulting a Thomsonian. The State Board of Medical Examiners was created in 1890. With the influence of Dr. Wells P. Eagleton of Essex County, a new acceptance of homeopathic medicine was embraced, and the statute called for 5 regular physicians, 3 homeopathic physicians, and 1 eclectic or Thomsonian physician. By 1910, New Jersey's homeopaths and Thomsonians were welcomed into the ranks of regular medicine. All 3 united in opposition to the new threat of osteopathy.
Gentlemen, I've asked you here today for a very simple reason. For many years, as you know, the gap between our society's way of practicing medicine and the way of those who prefer alternate means has been substantial. It is no secret that there is a great deal of animosity, dare I say even disdain, for those who follow the thoughts of the Thomsonians and the homeopaths. I am proposing to you, in light of recent developments, that we change our approach to said disciplines. Now, I am not in support of loosening our morals or our standards. However, it is undeniable that in the past 2 generations, many points of view have become increasingly similar, and they coincide with a desire to heal. Therefore, gentlemen, it is my hope that you take up a new role, that of older brother, and invite these groups into our organization. By doing so, I propose that we shall instead safeguard public health by requiring all those who wish to call themselves men of medicine to pass the Board of Medical Examiners tests, thus giving them the license to call themselves doctor.
The osteopaths came on around the turn of the century, 1900, 1905, long in there. And at that time, the conflict with the homeopaths had been completely resolved. There was no more concern about it. They were members of the medical society, both at the local, the state, and the national level, so it wasn't a problem anymore. But the osteopaths had a philosophy of treatment of patients that disease resulted from maladjustments in the skeletal system. Clearly that isn't scientific. Cracking someone's back or shoulder or neck or whatever is not a legitimate approach to the treatment of diphtheria, say, for example, or tuberculosis, or a psychotic state, or acute appendix, anything. It's not scientific and really doesn't have any value for patient except possibly as a placebo. After the First World War, the osteopaths began to gain strength and push their style of treating patients. And as I said, the medical community resisted and fought back. The problem for the regular physicians was that the osteopathic community by mid-century, 1940, 50, 1960, had begun to do exactly the same thing that the homeopaths had done. They began to adopt modern science as the basis of their practice. They gradually dropped off the practitioners who thought that manipulation of the spine was the only appropriate treatment for an osteopathic physician to offer to a patient, and they began to accept the science of medicine, so that they were becoming more and more and more like scientific physicians who could practice using the concepts of modern medical science.
One of the most disastrous pandemics of the earlier 20th century was the Spanish flu, named for its place of origin. While some say the carriers docked first in Boston, others say it was New York. Either way, in less than 100 days, the disease killed 12,000 civilians in New Jersey. While the Great War was known to kill 53,000 Americans in combat, influenza claimed 530,000 victims. Compounding the problem was the critical shortage of physicians and other medical personnel. Historian Dr. George Hill speaks of the epidemic.
Of course, the influenza epidemic happened at the end of World War I. 1917 it began, 1918 it was big time, 1919 it petered out in 1920. Influenza had been around before that. It's a virus disease, and it's with us to this day. But for some reason, still unknown, the influenza virus that came at that time was particularly virulent. It also had a way to migrate around the world at that time. For the first time, we had mass movements of people. We had mass movements of troops, of refugees, so that what would ordinarily in a virulent epidemic like that have been localized, in fact, spread.
The very nature of war between 1939 and 1945 forced those of us in medicine to rush forward the pace of advancement in science. Penicillin, which had been discovered much before the war to end all wars, was now needed on an industrial scale. It was a weapon so effective treating everything from staph infections to pneumonia that within a decade, once deadly diseases were no longer cause for panic. Penicillin used on D-Day was found to be especially integral against gangrene and other infirmities.
After I was discharged from the Marines honorably to go to medical school, then I was called to active duty. That was the time when all male doctors who were fit were called to active duty in one branch of service. It was the Public Health Service that took me. I was 2 years at the National Institutes of Health, with some very interesting duty there. The Cuban Missile Crisis happened during that period, and we were all told that our unit, the infectious disease unit, would be landing in Cuba if the crisis didn't end, and they expected us not to come home. Very sobering for a young person with a family. So I learned at that point that anyone in uniform may go in harm's way any time. After I was done my time in the Public Health Service, I was allowed to transfer to the Navy, and during my Navy time, I was had many very interesting experiences. I twice volunteered and went to Vietnam. Was probably the last Navy surgeon ever to do an operation in Vietnam. And after I came back from Vietnam, I was really motivated. I went to U.S. Army Airborne School and became the first Navy medical officer to qualify as a Navy and Marine Corps parachutist. Other jobs along the way included some very responsible jobs with the North Atlantic Treaty Operation, NATO exercises, and also 5 years at the Pentagon and 3 years at the National Naval Medical Center. I was there during the first Gulf War. Very anxious period. I was chairman of the Disaster Preparedness Committee, and we were prepared for truly mass casualties that were expected from the first Gulf War. So my military experience all started with the Marines, and it ended with the Marines. I'm still a Marine, but I'm glad to be here tonight and talk about it.
you.